Captain Jake Morrison pressed his hand against the cold metal wall of the bridge. Through the large window, Earth looked smaller than ever before. The blue and green planet that had been home to billions of humans was now just a dot in the darkness of space. Around him, his crew worked quietly at their stations. No one spoke much these days. The UES Horizon was one of 200 ships leaving Earth forever. Jake had commanded this vessel for 8 years, but today felt different. Today, they were not going on a mission or exploring new worlds. Today, they were running away from home because they had been told to leave. Lieutenant Amy Brooks walked up to Jake's side. She was young, maybe 25, with short brown hair and tired eyes. Like everyone else on the ship, she had not slept. Well, in weeks. The stress of leaving everything behind was hard on everyone. "Captain, the last transport ship just cleared Earth's atmosphere," Amy said softly. "All civilian evacuation ships are now in formation. We're ready to jump to hyperspace when you give the order." Jake nodded, but did not look away from Earth. Somewhere down there, empty cities waited in silence. Parks where children used to play were now quiet. Schools, hospitals, and homes stood empty. The humans had taken everything they could carry, but they had to leave behind the places where they had lived, loved, and built their lives. 3 months ago, everything had been normal. Jake remembered that Tuesday morning when Ambassador Kira Walsh had arrived at the Human Colonial Authority building in New Geneva. She was a tall woman with gray hair and a serious face. She had served as humanity's voice to the galaxy for 15 years. That morning, she carried news that would change everything. The Galactic Council had made their decision. After 3 days of debate, the representatives of the major alien species had voted. The Zephyrians, with their long blue necks and proud attitudes, had voted yes. The Koraths, looking like giant bears with silver fur, had voted yes. Even the Vex Collective, with their shared mind and mechanical bodies, had voted yes. The decision was clear and final. Humanity had to leave the inner part of the galaxy. They were growing too fast, learning too quickly, and becoming too independent. The Council said humans were a threat to the balance of power. They had to be moved to the outer edge of the galaxy, far away from the important worlds and trade routes. Jake had been in Admiral Lisa Carter's office when Ambassador Walsh delivered the news. The Admiral was a small woman, but she commanded respect from everyone who met her. She had fought in 3 wars and negotiated 5 peace treaties. Jake had never seen her look so tired. "They didn't even let us speak," Ambassador Walsh had said, her voice shaking with anger. 50 years of partnership, and they treated us like children being sent to their room. No discussion, no negotiation, no chance to defend ourselves. Admiral Carter had listened in silence. When the ambassador finished, the Admiral asked only one question. "How long do we have?" 6 months, Walsh replied. "They're being generous," they said. "Most species get 30 days. Jake remembered how quiet the room had become. Outside the window, he could see humans and aliens working together in the space station's docking bay. Engineers from 3 different species were fixing a Korath cargo ship, while a human doctor treated a sick Zephyrian child. These people had no idea that their world was about to change forever. Admiral Carter had stood up and walked to her desk. "Send a message to all human colonies and stations," she said calmly. "Tell them to begin immediate evacuation procedures. We will be gone in 6 months. Admiral," Ambassador Walsh had said, "maybe we should try to fight this decision. We have friends in the Council. The Altarians might support us, and some of the smaller species owe us favors." But Admiral Carter shook her head. "No, if they want us gone, we'll go, but we'll go with our dignity intact." That had been 3 months ago. Since then, every human in the galaxy had been working day and night to pack up their lives. Families had to choose what to take and what to leave behind. Scientists had to copy their research and pack their equipment. Engineers had to shut down the systems they had built and maintained for decades. The aliens had expected humans to beg or fight. They thought there would be protests, angry speeches, or maybe even attacks on council ships. Instead, humans had simply said, "Fine, we'll go," and started packing. Director Ben Taylor of the Human Colonial Authority had sent only one message to the council. Jake had helped write it. The message was short and polite. Humanity accepts the council's decision. We will leave our territories within 6 months. We wish the galaxy peace and prosperity. The council members had been confused by the simple response. Some had expected threats. Others had prepared for long negotiations. None of them had expected humans to just agree and start leaving. Jake turned away from the window and looked at his crew. These people had worked with him for years. They had explored new worlds, fixed broken ships, and kept the peace between different species. Now they were leaving all of that behind because the galaxy had decided humans were too dangerous to keep around. "Captain," called out Sergeant Pete Johnson from the communications station, "I'm getting reports from all fleet commanders. Everyone is ready to leave." Jake walked over to his captain's chair and sat down. The leather was worn and comfortable. He had made many important decisions from this chair. Today would be the most important one of all. "Open a channel to all ships," Jake ordered. "Channel open, sir," Pete replied. Jake took a deep breath. "This is Captain Morrison to all vessels in the evacuation fleet. Today we leave Earth and the inner galaxy behind. We were not defeated in battle. We were not destroyed by war. We leave because we choose to keep our honor rather than stay where we are not wanted." He paused and looked around the bridge. His crew was listening carefully. "We go to build something new, something better. We take with us everything that makes us human, our knowledge, our hope, and our determination to never give up. The galaxy thinks we are too dangerous to stay. Let's prove them right." Jake closed the channel and turned to his navigation officer. "Set course for the Kepler system. Signal the fleet to prepare for hyperspace jump." "Course set, Captain," replied the officer. "All ships report ready for jump," added Pete. Jake looked one last time at Earth through the window. The planet where humans had first looked up at the stars and dreamed of traveling to them. The place where they had built their first rockets and taken their first steps into space. Now they were leaving it forever, not as conquerors or refugees, but as people who refused to stay where they were not respected. "Jump," Jake commanded. The stars stretched into lines of light as the human fleet entered hyperspace. Behind them, Earth continued to orbit the sun, empty and quiet. Ahead of them waited new worlds, new challenges, and new opportunities. The Galactic Council had thought they were solving a problem by sending humans away. They had no idea they were about to learn what happens when you lose the people who fix your problems, heal your sick, and keep your civilization running. But that lesson would come later. For now, humanity was heading toward their new home, carrying with them everything they needed to build a better future. No battle, no goodbye. Just the quiet determination of people who knew their worth, even when others did not. Counselor Thex stood in his office on the top floor of the council building, looking out at the busy space lanes above the planet Centaria. 6 months had passed since the humans left, and the galaxy was supposed to be running smoothly again. Instead, everything seemed to be falling apart. The Zephyrian counselor was tall and thin, with blue skin and a long neck that made him look down on most other species. His people had ruled this part of the galaxy for over 1,000 years. They were proud of their culture, their technology, and their wisdom. But today, Vex felt old and tired. A soft chime told him someone was at his door. "Come in," he called. Not turning away from the window. Trade Minister Vex 9 entered the room. The robot-like being was part of the Vex Collective, a species that shared thoughts through computer implants in their brains. Vex 9's metal body moved with perfect precision, but today something seemed wrong. The usual smooth coordination was missing. "Counselor Vex," Vex 9 said in its electronic voice, "we must discuss the shipping crisis. Our cargo vessels are taking much longer to reach their destinations. The delays are getting worse every week." Vex turned around and walked to his desk. On the surface, a holographic map showed the galaxy's main trade routes. Red lights marked problems, yellow showed delays, and green meant everything was working normally. Most of the map was red and yellow. "How bad is it?" Vex asked, though he already knew the answer would not be good. 40% longer travel times on average, Vex 9 replied. Some routes are taking twice as long as they used to. The navigation systems are not working properly without human maintenance. Vex sat down heavily in his chair. The humans had been involved in everything, but he had not realized how much they did behind the scenes. They had created better navigation systems, improved the cargo handling procedures, and trained crews from dozens of different species. Now that they were gone, no one seemed to know how to keep things running. "What about our own technicians?" Vex asked. "Surely they can learn to operate the systems." Vex 9's head tilted slightly, a sign of uncertainty that was unusual for the normally confident collective being. "The human systems are more complex than we expected. Our engineers are studying them, but progress is slow. The humans did not just build machines. They built systems that think and adapt. Without their knowledge of how these systems work, we can only guess at repairs." Before Vex could respond, another visitor arrived. Dr. Kala Vorth was a Korath, one of the bear-like species that controlled most of the galaxy's mining and heavy industry. Her silver fur was streaked with gray, and she looked exhausted. "Counselor," she said as she entered, "we have a medical emergency. The hospitals on 12 different worlds are requesting immediate assistance." "What kind of emergency?" Vex asked, though he suspected he already knew. "The Terran Medical Initiative hospitals are operating at 60% capacity," Dr. Vorth explained. "We cannot make several important medicines that humans developed. The chemical formulas are too complex for our laboratories to reproduce." She pulled up a holographic display showing sick patients in hospital beds. "There is a plague outbreak on Nexus Prime. Normally, we would use human-developed treatments to stop the spread, but we cannot make the medicine without their expertise. The disease is spreading faster than we can treat it." Vex felt a cold fear growing in his stomach. "How many people are affected?" "So far, 3,000 cases on Nexus Prime alone. But the disease has appeared on 4 other worlds in the past week. Without the human treatments, we estimate it could spread to millions of people." The counselor stood up and walked to the window again. Below, he could see aliens from dozens of different species walking through the streets of the capital city. They had no idea how much danger they were in. "What about the human medical knowledge?" he asked. "They must have left some information behind." Dr. Vorth shook her head. "They took everything with them. All research files, all medical equipment, all treatment protocols. The hospitals they left behind have basic equipment, but not the advanced systems they developed over the past 50 years. Vex remembered the debates in the council chambers 6 months ago. The other counselors had argued that humans were becoming too powerful, too independent. They were developing technology faster than the established species could control. Some had even suggested that humans might try to take over the galaxy if they were not stopped. Now he wondered if they had made a terrible mistake. "There is more bad news," Vex 9 said quietly. The collective is experiencing coordination problems. Our hive mind network is becoming unstable. This was the worst news yet. The Vex Collective was one of the most powerful species in the galaxy, because they could share thoughts instantly across vast distances. Their ability to work together as one mind made them incredibly efficient and nearly impossible to defeat in battle. How is that possible? Vex asked. The cybernetic implants that connect our minds were improved using human neural interface technology, Vex 9 explained. Without regular updates and maintenance, the implants are beginning to fail. Some of our people are becoming disconnected from the collective. They are experiencing what you might call loneliness. For a member of the Vex Collective, being disconnected from the shared mind was like being blinded and deafened at the same time. They had never learned to function as individuals because they had always been part of something larger. We calculate a 73% probability of societal collapse within 18 months if the degradation continues. Vex 9 added. Vex sat down again and put his head in his hands. In just 6 months, everything the council had worked to protect was falling apart. The humans had not conquered them with weapons or threats. They had simply become so useful, so essential, that the galaxy could not function without them. What do the other council members say? He asked. The Koraths are dealing with their own problems, Dr. Vorth replied. Their mining equipment is breaking down without human maintenance protocols. 3 major mining operations have already shut down completely. And the smaller species? Vex asked. Many are requesting emergency aid, Vex 9 said. The Altarians, the Draconis, the Centauri Federation. They all depended on human expertise for various systems. Without that support, they are struggling to maintain basic infrastructure. Vex walked to his desk and activated the communication system. Connect me to the other council members. We need an emergency session. As he waited for the connection, Vex thought about the human response to their exile. There had been no angry speeches, no threats of revenge, no attempts to sabotage the systems they left behind. They had simply packed up and left, taking their knowledge and skills with them. Maybe that was the most frightening thing of all. The humans had not needed to fight back because they knew that the galaxy would eventually realize what it had lost. Meanwhile, far away in the outer rim of the galaxy, the humans were building something new. On a planet they called New Haven, Commander Rick Hayes was establishing the first human enclave. The world was harsh and challenging, but the colonists worked with the same quiet determination that had made them valuable to the galaxy. They had brought more than just their personal belongings to their new home. Hidden in the data banks of their ships were complete copies of every human contribution to galactic civilization. Medical research, engineering designs, navigation algorithms, and thousands of other innovations that had made life better for billions of beings. But now those innovations would serve only humanity. And whoever earned their friendship and respect, the galaxy was learning a hard lesson about the difference between power and dependency. The council had thought they held all the power because they made the laws and commanded the fleets. But real power belonged to the people who kept the lights on, healed the sick, and solved the problems that everyone else ignored. The humans were gone, and the cracks were beginning to show. 2 years had passed since the humans left, and Ambassador Yex Prime walked through the empty corridors of the council building with heavy steps. The mechanical being had once moved with perfect coordination, every action smooth and calculated. Now, small glitches made him stumble occasionally, and his thoughts sometimes scattered like leaves in the wind. The Vex Collective was dying. One mind at a time. YEX Prime entered the emergency council chamber, where the remaining leaders of the galaxy waited. The room that had once held representatives from 50 different species now hosted only 12. Many smaller worlds had stopped sending ambassadors because they could no longer afford the journey. Their economies had collapsed without human support. Counselor Vex looked older than his 800 years. His blue skin had faded to a pale gray, and his once proud posture had bent under the weight of constant crisis. The Zephyrian Republic was fracturing as different colonies blamed each other for the disaster. The situation grows worse each day, Vex began, his voice tired and hollow. The outer colonies are declaring independence. They say the Council failed them when we sent away the humans. General Korax of the Korath Empire slammed his massive paw on the table. The bear-like alien's silver fur was dirty and unkempt. His people were proud warriors and builders, but they had depended on human engineering more than anyone realized. Our mining operations have collapsed completely, Korax growled. The excavation equipment fails every few days. We have engineers working around the clock, but they cannot fix what they do not understand. 3 of our major industrial worlds have gone dark. No power, no communication, no hope. Dr. Vorth, the Korath medical officer, nodded sadly. The plague that started on Nexus Prime has spread to 47 worlds. Without human medicine, we can only slow the disease, not stop it. The death count is approaching 2 million beings. But it was Yex Prime who carried the worst news of all. The Vex Collective had been the backbone of galactic communication and coordination for centuries. Now that backbone was breaking. We must speak of the unthinkable, Yex Prime said, his electronic voice crackling with static. The collective is fragmenting. Our neural implants continue to degrade without human maintenance. We estimate that 60% of our population has lost connection to the shared mind. The other council members stared at him in shock. The idea of the Vex Collective falling apart was like imagining the sun going out. It seemed impossible. What does that mean for your civilization? Asked Counselor Vex. Our people are experiencing individual consciousness for the first time in 1,000 years, Yex Prime explained. They do not know how to make decisions alone. They do not understand personal desire or fear. Many are becoming catatonic from the shock. Others are acting irrationally, driven by emotions they cannot comprehend. He paused, and for a moment, his mechanical face showed something that looked like pain. We have civil war breaking out between different hive nodes. Groups that were once part of the same mind are now fighting each other because they can no longer communicate properly. A chamber fell silent. Outside the building, they could hear the sounds of protests and riots. The people of Zentaria, the Council's capital world, were demanding answers and solutions that their leaders could not provide. We need to contact the humans, said Dr. Vorth quietly. We must ask for their help. General Korax shook his massive head. They are beyond our reach. Our long-range communications are failing without their relay stations. We do not even know where they went in the outer rim. Some of our exploration ships have reported detecting human signals near the Kepler system, offered a minor counselor from the Draconis Federation. But the journey would take months, and we are not certain. Our ships could make the trip without breaking down. Counselor Vex stood up and walked to the large window that looked out over the capital city. Smoke rose from several districts where protests had turned violent. The elegant spires and floating platforms that had once shown the glory of Galactic civilization were now scarred by damage and neglect. Even if we could reach them, Vex said slowly, why would they help us? We cast them out like criminals. We treated them as a threat when they were our greatest asset. Meanwhile, in the far reaches of space, Captain Pete Johnson stood on the bridge of the FFS New Dawn, watching his crew perform a routine patrol of human space. The former sergeant had been promoted to ship commander when the human fleet expanded to protect their growing territory. The transformation of human society in just 2 years was remarkable. What had started as refugee camps on harsh frontier Worlds had become thriving colonies. New Haven, their capital world, now hosted over 10 million people and served as the center of a growing network of human settlements. Captain, called Lieutenant Sarah Walsh from the communications station, "We're receiving another distress signal from the inner galaxy. This one is from the Altarian system." Pete walked over to review the message. The Altarians had always been friendly to humans, but they had been too small and weak to oppose the Council's decision to exile humanity. Now they were paying the price for their silence. "What do they need?" Pete asked. "Medical assistance," Sarah replied. "The plague has reached their homeworld. They're requesting any help we can provide." Pete thought for a moment. President Amy Brooks had established a clear policy about contact with the inner galaxy. Humanity would provide humanitarian aid to those who asked for it, but only on human terms. No strings attached, no political demands, and no return to the old system of being taken for granted. "Send a medical ship to the Altarian system," Pete ordered. "Standard humanitarian mission. Help them fight the plague, but make it clear that this is a one-time assistance unless they want to establish formal diplomatic relations with the Human Alliance." It was a pattern that had repeated dozens of times over the past year. Species that had once ignored or dismissed humanity were now desperate for their help. The humans responded with carefully measured assistance, never quite enough to solve the problems completely, but enough to show what they were capable of. On New Haven, Admiral Jake Morrison walked through the bustling streets of the colonial capital. The city had grown from nothing to a metropolis in just 2 years. Human ingenuity, freed from the restrictions and regulations of the old council, had created wonders that surprised even their builders. The architecture was uniquely human, blending practical engineering with artistic beauty. Buildings rose in spirals and curves that seemed to defy gravity, held up by construction techniques that human engineers had developed in secret during their final years in council space. Jake stopped at a cafe where he was meeting with Dr. Linda Torres, the head of human scientific development. She was a small woman with graying hair and bright eyes that sparkled with intelligence. The council sent another message. Dr. Torres told him as he sat down. "They're offering to negotiate our return to the inner galaxy." Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. "What are they offering?" "Full citizenship rights, representation on the council, and guaranteed autonomy for our colonies," she replied. "And what do they want in return?" "Our complete scientific database, immediate deployment of medical teams to fight the plague, and restoration of all the systems we maintained before our exile." Jake shook his head. "They still don't understand, do they? They think this is about politics or territory. They want us to fix their problems and then go back to being their reliable servants." Dr. Torres nodded. "President Brooks asked me to prepare a response. I think she wants to make our position very clear." The message that President Amy Brooks sent to the council 3 days later was polite but firm. It thanked them for their offer, but explained that humanity had moved beyond the old system. They were building something new, something better, and they had no interest in returning to a galaxy that had treated them as a threat rather than as partners. The galaxy had made its choice, and now humanity had made theirs. The cascade effect was accelerating, and there seemed to be no way to stop it. The IV reconciliation moved slowly through the darkness between stars, carrying the most important diplomatic mission in galactic history. Captain Zara Velen, a Zephyrian officer who had opposed the human exile from the beginning, watched the long-range sensors as they approached the outer rim territories. "How much longer until we reach human space?" asked Ambassador Thex. The once proud counselor now looked frail and desperate. His government had collapsed 3 months ago when the outer colonies declared independence. He was no longer a counselor, but a refugee seeking help from the people his species had cast out. 2 more days, Captain Velen replied. The journey has taken longer than expected. Our navigation systems are still unreliable without human maintenance. In the passenger compartment, the highest-ranking survivors of the old galactic order sat in uncomfortable silence. General Korax had aged decades in just 3 years. His mighty Korath Empire had fractured into dozens of warring clans fighting over the few remaining working minds. Half of his industrial worlds were dark, their populations either dead from plague or scattered to refugee camps. Dr. Kalavorth stared out the window at the stars, her silver fur now completely white from stress. The medical crisis had claimed over 50 million lives across the galaxy. Entire species were on the verge of extinction because they could not treat diseases that had once been easily curable. But the most changed passenger was Yex Prime. The former collective leader now spoke and acted as an individual, something that would have been impossible 3 years ago. The breakdown of the Vex Collective had forced its members to learn independence, but the cost had been terrible. There, civilization had torn itself apart in civil wars, as different fragments of the former hive mind fought for dominance. I still cannot believe we are doing this, muttered General Korax, begging for help from the species we exiled. We are not begging, said Yex Prime, though his voice lacked conviction. We are negotiating. We have things to offer them. What could we possibly offer? Asked Dr. Vorth. They have surpassed us in every way that matters. Our technology is failing, our governments are collapsing, and our people are dying. What do we have that they want? The question hung in the air without an answer, because they all knew the truth. They had nothing to offer except their surrender. The journey to human space had taken 4 months to organize and approve. The old council had dissolved completely, replaced by a desperate alliance of surviving governments. Many species had simply given up and retreated to their homeworlds to wait for the end. Others had tried to rebuild their civilizations from scratch with limited success. The humans, meanwhile, had become legends. Stories filtered back to the inner galaxy about their thriving colonies, their advanced technology, and their growing alliance with species that the old council had ignored or dismissed. They had not just survived their exile. They had used it to become something greater than they had ever been before. When the reconciliation finally reached the border of human space, they were met by a fleet of ships unlike anything they had ever seen. The vessels were sleek and elegant, combining human engineering with design elements from dozens of different species. These were not the crude frontier ships the Council had expected to find. These were the vessels of a major galactic power. The lead ship identified itself as the FFS Liberty, commanded by Admiral Jake Morrison. The former captain had become one of the most respected leaders in human space, known for his fair treatment of both humans and aliens who sought to join their alliance. ISV Reconciliation, this is Admiral Morrison. Please state your business in Human Alliance territory. Captain Valen activated the communication system with shaking hands. Admiral Morrison, this is Captain Valen. We carry diplomatic representatives from the former Galactic Council. We request permission to approach New Haven to discuss terms for renewed cooperation between our peoples. There was a long pause before. Morrison's voice came back, calm and professional. Permission granted. You will be escorted to New Haven by 2 of our ships. Please follow their instructions exactly. Any deviation from the approved course will be considered a hostile act. The escort ships were smaller than the Liberty, but obviously more advanced than anything the old council had built. Their crews were a mix of humans and aliens, working together with the kind of seamless cooperation that had once been humanity's greatest strength. As they approached New Haven, the delegation stared in amazement at what they saw. The planet that had been a harsh frontier world just 3 years ago was now the center of a bustling interstellar civilization. Orbital stations surrounded the world like jewels, and the traffic of merchant ships was heavier than most core worlds had ever seen. The capital city of New Geneva stretched across an entire continent, its gleaming towers reaching toward the sky. Parks and gardens were visible from orbit, showing that the humans had not sacrificed beauty for function. This was not the desperate refugee settlement a council had expected to find. This was the capital of a civilization that had surpassed. Its former masters. Ambassador Helen Parker met them at the spaceport. She was a tall woman with gray hair and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She had been a minor trade representative during the old council days, and now she spoke for one of the galaxy's major powers. "Gentlemen, Doctor," she said with polite courtesy, "welcome to New Haven. I trust your journey was comfortable despite the circumstances." The delegation was escorted to a conference room in the planetary government building. The architecture was distinctly human, but incorporated elements from many different cultures. It was a statement of inclusion and diversity that stood in sharp contrast to the rigid hierarchies of the old council. "We appreciate you agreeing to meet with us," began former Councilor Thex. "We come with an offer of cooperation and mutual benefit." Ambassador Parker sat across from them with a small smile that did not reach her eyes. "Please, speak freely. We are always interested in hearing proposals from our former colleagues. The situation in the inner galaxy has become challenging." Thex continued carefully. "We believe that renewed cooperation between our peoples could benefit everyone involved." "What kind of cooperation did you have in mind?" Parker asked. General Corax leaned forward eagerly. "Full restoration of human colonies in the inner galaxy. Complete citizenship rights for all humans. Guaranteed representation on a reformed council, with humans as equal partners." "And in return?" Parker asked. "Your complete scientific database," said Dr. Vorth. "Medical teams to help fight the plague. Engineers to restore our failing infrastructure. A return to the old system of cooperation. That benefited everyone." Parker was quiet for a long moment, studying the faces of the desperate aliens who had once held ultimate power over human destiny. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "I'm afraid you still don't understand the situation. You're asking us to fix your problems and then return to being your reliable servants. You want the benefits of human innovation without acknowledging the fundamental errors that led to this crisis." "What errors?" asked DX Prime, genuinely confused. "You saw us as a threat to be contained rather than partners to be valued," Parker replied. "You made decisions about our future without including us in the discussion. You assumed that we would always be available to solve your problems, no matter how you treated us." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the thriving city below. "The galaxy made its choice 3 years ago. You decided you didn't need us. Now we've decided we don't need you." The delegation sat in stunned silence. They had expected negotiations, compromises, perhaps even demands for reparations. They had not expected simple rejection. "Surely there must be some arrangement we can make," pleaded Thex. "Our people are dying. Our civilizations are collapsing. And that is truly tragic," Parker replied with genuine sympathy. "But it's not our responsibility to fix the consequences of your choices. You created this situation. You must find your own way out of it." A meeting was over, and with it, the last hope of the old galactic order. 5 years after humanity's departure from the inner galaxy, Secretary of State Mark Wilson stood in his office on New Haven, reading reports from across the known universe. The morning briefing painted a picture of 2 very different realities, separated by vast distances and choices made long ago. In the inner galaxy, the old Galactic Council no longer existed. The Zephyrian Republic had split into 7 independent states that barely spoke to each other. The Korath Empire had shrunk to a handful of mining worlds where families fought over the last working equipment. The Vex Collective had completely fragmented, its former members now living as confused individuals who still did not understand how to function alone. Some worlds had managed to maintain basic civilization, but most had fallen into economic collapse and technological decline. The plague that started on Nexus Prime had finally burned itself out, but not before claiming over 100 million lives across 40 systems. Trade between worlds had almost stopped because navigation and communication systems continued to fail without human maintenance. But the Outer Rim told a different story entirely. The human alliance had grown from desperate refugees to a major galactic power in just 5 years. Their territory now included over 200 settled worlds and 50 space stations. More importantly, they had created something that had never existed before. A truly inclusive galactic civilization. Mark walked to his window and looked down at the street below. New Geneva had become one of the most diverse cities in the galaxy. Humans worked alongside Altarians, whose crystal-like beings sparkled in the morning sun. Draconis merchants, with their reptilian features and colorful scales, sold goods imported from dozens of worlds. Even some former Vex Collective members had found homes here, learning to live as individuals with the patient help of human counselors. These were the species that the old council had dismissed as primitive or unimportant. Under human leadership, they had discovered talents and abilities that no one had recognized before. The Altarians turned out to be brilliant mathematicians whose crystal minds could solve complex equations instantly. The Draconis were natural explorers who could navigate dangerous space anomalies that stopped other species. Even the scattered Vex individuals brought unique perspectives that came from their experience of shared consciousness. A soft chime indicated that someone was requesting entry to his office. "Come in," Mark called. Admiral Jake Morrison entered, carrying a datapad with the latest intelligence reports. The former ship captain had become one of the most trusted military leaders in the Alliance, but today he looked troubled. "Mark, we need to talk about the situation in the Kepler 442 system," Jake said, taking a seat across from the desk. "The refugees?" Mark asked. He knew that more people were fleeing the inner galaxy every month, seeking safety in human space. "It's getting worse. 3 more ships arrived yesterday, carrying families from the former Korath territories. They're asking for asylum, but they're also carrying diseases we've never seen before. Dr. Torres thinks the medical crisis in the inner galaxy has created new plague variants." Mark nodded grimly. The Human Alliance had a strict policy about refugees. Anyone who came seeking help was welcome, but they had to undergo complete medical screening and cultural integration training. The humans had learned from the old councils mistakes and refused to create second-class citizens. "What's our capacity for handling more refugees?" Mark asked. "We can manage the medical issues," Jake replied. "But the cultural integration is more challenging. These people come from societies that collapsed completely. They don't understand concepts like individual responsibility or democratic decision-making. Some of them expect us to simply take charge and tell them what to do." It was a problem the Alliance faced regularly. People from the inner galaxy had lived for centuries under rigid hierarchies where a few species made all the decisions. The idea that every individual, regardless of species or background, had a voice in government was foreign to them. "How is the integration program working?" Mark asked. "Better than expected," Jake admitted. "The Altarian counselors have been particularly effective at helping former collective members adjust to individual consciousness. And some of the refugees are bringing valuable skills. We have a group of Korath engineers who know mining techniques that could be useful on our frontier worlds." Mark made notes on his datapad. The refugee situation was just one of many challenges facing the Alliance, but it was also an opportunity. Every person who found a new life in human space became an advocate for their way of doing things. A communication alert interrupted their discussion. Mark activated the holographic display to see Ambassador Helen Parker calling from the diplomatic station at the edge of Alliance space. "Mark Jake," she said, her face serious. "We have a situation developing. Long-range sensors are detecting a large convoy heading toward our border from the inner galaxy." "How large?" Jake asked, immediately shifting into military mode. 50 ships carrying approximately 500,000 beings. They're not military vessels, but they're too big to be a normal refugee group. We think it might be an entire planetary population. Mark leaned back in his chair, considering the implications. 500,000 refugees would strain their resources. But turning away an entire civilization would go against everything the Alliance stood for. "What's their status?" he asked. "They're requesting emergency asylum," Helen replied. The lead ship identified itself as carrying the survivors of the Draconis Prime colony. They say their world was abandoned after the government collapsed and basic services failed. Jake and Mark exchanged glances. Draconis Prime had been one of the more stable worlds in the inner galaxy. If it had fallen, then the situation was worse than their intelligence reports suggested. Grant them temporary sanctuary in the Kepler system, Mark decided. But full screening and integration protocols apply. No exceptions. "Understood," Helen replied. "There's something else you should know. The convoy is carrying a message from what remains of the old council leadership. They're asking for a formal meeting to discuss ... surrender terms." The word hung in the air like a heavy weight. Surrender. The proud species that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years were ready to admit complete defeat. "What kind of surrender are they proposing?" Mark asked. "Complete transfer of authority over the inner galaxy to the Human Alliance," Helen replied. "They want us to take control of their remaining territories and restore order." Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. "They still don't understand. They think we want to rule them the way they ruled us." Mark stood up and walked to the window again, watching the diverse crowds in the street below. Children of different species played together in the parks, their parents working side by side in shops and offices. This was what the galaxy could become if people chose cooperation over domination. "Send them our standard response," Mark told Helen. "The Human Alliance has no interest in ruling over other species. We offer partnership to those who are willing to embrace our values of equality, cooperation, and mutual respect. But we will not become the new overlords of a failed system." Over the following months, the message became clear to anyone who was paying attention. The humans had not left the inner galaxy to punish their former oppressors. They had left to build something better. The Alliance continued to grow, welcoming refugees and voluntary partners while maintaining strict standards for membership. Council worlds were free to rebuild their civilizations however they chose. Some managed to create stable governments, and even requested trade agreements with the Alliance. Others continued to decline, trapped by their inability to change old ways of thinking. But in the Outer Rim, something unprecedented was taking shape. For the first time in galactic history, a civilization existed where strength came not from military might or political dominance, but from the simple recognition that every being deserved dignity and respect. The galaxy had learned that some victories are won not through conquest, but through the quiet determination to build something worthwhile, while others cling to the ruins of their pride. The Human Alliance stood as proof that the greatest power was not the ability to control others, but the wisdom to create a society where everyone could thrive. The old order had fallen, and in its place grew something that offered hope for a better future among the stars.